We have living proof of that in Wales. I think it is a great shame that when the Secretary of State for Health in England offered the support of the NHS in England to alleviate pressures on waiting times in Wales, the Welsh Health Secretary turned that down. That is Labour's record on the NHS.
Sir Christopher Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the problems a lot of my constituents have raised with me is that when they do get a letter calling them for an appointment, including ones where they've been waiting for some time, the letter arrives after the appointment date because the Royal Mail is now delivering such an appalling service. Isn't it time we really had a strong words to make sure that people who are being called for appointments get a chance to turn up to them because they've actually had the letter on time?
The Right Honourable Gentleman makes a good point, one which I will certainly investigate with colleagues, but I think the problem lies with the mismanagement of the Welsh NHS, for which his party must take responsibility.
Question 7, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government recognises the importance of victims having access to the support they need to recover from the impact of crime. That is why we are quadrupling funding for victim services, up from £41 million in 2010.
Mr. Speaker, as a recent victim of crime, the impact on the victim makes you reflect on the impact on the victim, but also on how many crimes remain unresolved. Latest figures show that 9 in 10 crimes in Wales went unsolved in the last 6 months. So what can the Minister say to the victims of the 82,000 reported crimes that went uncharged last year?
Can I firstly say how sorry I am to learn that the Honourable Lady has been a victim of crime. I know the experience she's gone through, and I personally send her my huge sympathies. This government has a proud record in delivering on victims of crime, whether that's new pieces of legislation or the record headcount of police officers. Unfortunately, it was the Welsh Government who chose to reduce the numbers of police community support officers last year, which is having an impact on victims of crime.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that we are all victims when senior Labour politicians make false and misleading statements at public inquiries?
Yes.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. It is deeply concerning that a First Minister should reveal himself to have acted in such a way which appears to be entirely contrary. I look forward to Welsh Labour members looking for further scrutiny on that issue.
Matt Weston. Stay.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 10 and 11 together. I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues on a range of subjects, including steelmaking in Wales. The Government is investing £500 million to retain steelmaking at Port Talbot, and not only in Port Talbot actually, but at other Tata sites, including Llanwern and Shotton, protecting 5,000 jobs and thousands more in the supply chain whilst increasing our economic security. And at the same time, the Government have put aside £80 million for the Transition Board to spend supporting anyone who loses their job in Port Talbot and the wider community.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether it be the transmission pylons and lines to upgrade our power grid as demanded by the Windsor report, or the prospect of building steel-based offshore wind platforms, the Welsh steel industry can and should be central to our transition to a net zero nation. When historic investments are being made by European competitors in green steel, does the Minister recognise that it is the Government's lack of ambition for Britain that has let thousands of skilled workers down?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman makes a good point about the importance of making sure there's a grid connection to enable an electric arc furnace to work properly. And I've raised this issue with National Grid, and they've assured me that the grid connection can be made on time. He makes a second reasonable point about the importance of being able to use steel produced in Port Talbot for floating offshore wind turbines. That is not the case at the moment because, as some of his shadow frontbenchers seem to be unaware of, the steel made in Port Talbot is coil, which is too thin to make floating offshore wind turbines. The Honourable Gentleman will be pleased to know that there are discussions going on with one major investor to try and ensure that the steel produced from the arc furnace can be made in a way that could support floating offshore wind structures.
Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The sustainability of domestic automotive manufacturing is vital to the future prosperity of Luton's local economy. So what discussions has the Minister had with the UK's automotive industry about the effect of losing our sovereign virgin steel production on their supply chain costs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've had a number of discussions. Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with the automotive industry. I've also had regular discussions with the steel industry across the United Kingdom. 90% of the grades that are currently produced by Port Talbot can be produced using an electric arc furnace. And there is work going on to ensure that the other 10% can be. But can I just remind the Honourable Lady that we actually have a plan for Port Talbot. When Tata came to us, they were looking to close down Port Talbot, to pull out of the United Kingdom, and it's a move that would have cost 8,000 jobs and 12,500 in the wider supply chain. As a result of that, the UK Conservative government stepped forward with £500 million of investment to support an electric arc furnace and a further £80 million to support retraining workers and to support infrastructure improvements in Port Talbot. And we have had not one single penny from the Welsh Labour government, who instead have decided today to prioritise spending £120 million on more Senedd members. More Senedd members or support for steelworkers. I know what my priority is, Mr. Speaker.
We now come to questions to Prime Minister Kirsten Oswald.
Question 1, please.
Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will join me in congratulating John Swinney on becoming SNP leader and Scottish First Minister. I look forward to working constructively with him to deliver for the people of Scotland. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At last week's Prime Minister's questions, I highlighted the shocking rise in the number of teenagers trying vaping, and asked the Prime Minister if he would take decisive action to stop vape advertising on football strips. He declined to do that. Since then, I have had an exchange with the Scottish Chief Medical Officer, Professor Sir Gregor Smith, during a session of the Tobacco and Vapes Bill Committee. And he said, "Where I become very uncomfortable and I am not supportive is where the massive attraction of sports companies is used in a way that promotes behaviours that are known to be unsafe or unhealthy." Can I ask the Prime Minister again, does he still think that it is right that vape companies should sponsor football kits?
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad the Honourable Lady agrees with me and the Government that we should do more to tackle youth vaping, and that's why we are bringing forward measures in the new bill to restrict the availability and appeal of vapes to children specifically, whether that's flavours or indeed marketing. As she knows, advertising of vapes is already heavily restricted by UK regulations, including a ban on advertising on television and radio and most online. Now, we've seen football take positive voluntary action in the past on issues such as this, but I will say to her that the Government will respond to the Honourable Lady's specific amendment in the usual way.
Cheryl Merritt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Officer in the Armed Forces. In recent weeks, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has announced plans to control welfare and get people back to work, to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, and pass legislation to get flights off to Rwanda. Does he agree with me that these are all issues that real people like my constituents in South East Cornwall care about, and that the Leader of the Opposition should do the right thing and back them?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion for her local area. And can I also thank her daughter for her service in the armed forces? And she's right, I'm not surprised that the Labour Party don't back our plans to stop the boats. I'm not surprised they don't back our plans to get people into work and reform welfare. But I do think that they should do the right thing when it comes to the security of our nation, and that's back our plans to increase defence spending and give our brave armed forces personnel the resources they need to keep us safe.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, can I warmly welcome the new member for Blackpool South? After the representation that fine town has had recently, it's good to know they've got a proper champion back at last. Can I also warmly welcome the new Labour MP for Dover to these benches? Mr. Speaker, if 1 week a Tory MP who's also a doctor says the Prime Minister can't be trusted with the NHS and joins Labour, and the next week the Tory MP for Dover, on the front line of the small boats crisis, says the Prime Minister cannot be trusted with our borders and joins Labour, what is the point of this failed government staggering on?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I actually join him in welcoming his newest MP for Blackpool? I must say he looks a lot happier than the member who was sitting there last week. But let me also join with him, and let me join with him in congratulating all new and paying tribute to all former councillors, PCCs and mayors across the country. I hope his new ones do him as proud as I am of all of mine, Mr. Speaker. Great leaders like Andy Street, who leave behind a strong legacy of more homes, more jobs and more investment, in sharp contrast to the legacy left by the last Labour government, which was a letter joking that there was no money left.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in addition to losing 2 Tory MPs in 2 weeks, the Prime Minister's been on the receiving end of some of the biggest by-election swings in history. He's also lost 1,500 Tory councillors, half of his party's mayors, and a leadership election to a lettuce. How many more times do the public and his own MPs need to reject him before he takes the hint?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this time last year I reminded him of some advice, actually, from his own mentor, Tony Blair, who had said at the time that he can be as cocky as he likes about local elections, but come a general election, it's policy that counts, Mr. Speaker. Now, one year on from that advice, what has he managed? £28 billion of tax rises, 70 new business regulations, 30 U-turns and a deputy leader under a police investigation.
Well, I'm surprised he brought up a police investigation. I think his record is played 1, no, actually 2, the seatbelt as well. Played 2, lost 2 in relation to police investigation. But it's the same. The public keep telling him, the voters tell him it's not good enough. Instead of listening, he keeps telling them everything's fine if only they'd realise his greatness. He just doesn't get it. But at least after Thursday night, Mr. Speaker, he can go to the many places that he calls home and enjoy the fruits of his success. In Southampton or Downing Street, he's got great Labour councils. At his mansion in Richmond, he can enjoy a brand new Labour mayor of North Yorkshire. And at his pad in Kensington, he can celebrate a historic 3rd term for the Mayor of London. Now that he too can enjoy the benefits of this changed Labour Party, is he really still in such a hurry to get back to California?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I must say I was of course surprised to see the honourable gentleman in North Yorkshire, but probably not as surprised as he was when he realised he couldn't take the tube there, Mr. Speaker. But I can tell him that the people of North Yorkshire believe in hard work, secure borders, lower taxes and straight-talking common sense, Mr. Speaker. They're not going to get any of that from a virtue-signalling lawyer from North London.
Well, it was great to be in Northallerton, where they just voted to reject the Prime Minister's proposition. Mr. Speaker, he's finally found something in common with the British public. No matter where he calls home, all his neighbours are backing this changed Labour Party. And they keep rejecting him because they have sussed him out. They know there's nothing behind the boasts, the gimmicks, the smug smile. He's a dodgy salesman, desperate to sell them a dud. Now, Mr. Speaker, 16 days ago, when he held a press conference claiming victory on Rwanda, he said the next few weeks will be about action. People want deeds, not words. So let's test that. How many small boat crossings have there been since he said that 16 days ago?
Mr. Speaker, actually, just before we go on to that, he talked about a changed Labour Party. That's important because he talked about a changed Labour Party. He talks about it a lot. But just this morning, and he also talked about his new mayor in London. So just this morning, we've learned that the Labour mayor in London believes, and I quote, that there is an equivalence between the brutal terrorist attack of Hamas and Israel defending itself. And let me be crystal clear. There is absolutely no equivalence between a terrorist coup and a democratic state. So can I ask him now, will he take this opportunity to demonstrate that that Labour Party has changed? And will he condemn those comments from the Labour mayor?
Well, I know that was the last run out before the general election, but he's getting ahead of himself in asking me questions. But Mr. Speaker, I notice he didn't even attempt to answer the question. He knows the answer. Since he claimed victory 16 days ago, there have been a staggering 2,400 small boat crossings. 2,400! That's a gimmick, not a deterrent. And those 2,400 will be added to the Tories asylum perma backlog, which is forecast to rise to 100,000 by the end of this year. Now, the Prime Minister pretends he will remove them all to Rwanda. But Rwanda can only take a few hundred a year. At that rate, the Prime Minister's grand plan would take over 300 years to remove them all. Mr. Speaker, that's tens of thousands of people with their claims going unprocessed, who are going to be here for their entire lifetime living in hotels at the taxpayers' expense. It is absurd to call that anything other than an amnesty handed to them by the Tory party, isn't it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he had the opportunity to condemn the comments of his mayor, a mayor who said that there is an equivalence between Hamas and Israel. He did not do that, and everyone will see what that is. That is the Change Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, right there. But since I became Prime Minister, small boat crossings are down by a third. That's because we've doubled NCA funding, increased enforcement rates, closed bank accounts, deported 24,000 people, processed more claims, and, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to border control, there is a crucial difference between us. We want secure borders. He's happy with open borders.
Mr. Speaker, the whole country knows that removing less than 1% of asylum seekers isn't stopping the boats, it's granting an amnesty, a Tory amnesty. But if he thinks the voters are wrong, if he thinks his own MPs joining the Labour Party are wrong, if he thinks anyone believes any of the nonsense that he spouts, why doesn't he put it to the test and call a general election?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about removing people. This is a person who campaigned to stop the deportation of foreign national offenders, Mr. Speaker. It shows how out of touch his values are with the British people. But, Mr. Speaker, it's yet another week where we hear nothing about his plan to do anything on the issues that matter to the country. Meanwhile, we're getting on, reforming welfare and getting people into work. He opposes it. We're controlling migration, legal and illegal. He opposes it. And as we heard, Mr. Speaker, we are boosting defence spending to strengthen our country. He opposes it, and that's the difference. He snipes from the sidelines. The Conservatives are building a brighter future.
When it comes to small boat crossings, there's a lot of talk of human rights. But surely the only human right and life that matters is the life of children who are being taken across the Channel. In this respect, will the government now do the only thing that will actually be a real deterrence, and that is to arrest and detain all those who land illegally on our shores and then offshore them promptly, so that once and for all we can save lives and end this cruel and callous trade?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is right that these crossings are incredibly dangerous and they risk people's lives. Just weeks ago, a 7-year-old girl died attempting the crossing, and that's why, as a matter of basic compassion, we must do everything we can to break the cycle of the criminal gangs. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, you need a deterrent. That's what the National Crime Agency say. That's how we dealt with illegal migrants from Albania, because it's only by removing people who shouldn't be here that we remove the reason for them to come in the first place. And that is how we'll control our borders. And it's clear that it's only this party that not only has a plan to stop the boats, but has a plan to stop the tragic loss of life in the Channel 2.
SNP Leader Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I begin by also congratulating the fantastic John Swinney on becoming Scotland's first Minister. Our opponents should be careful, very careful what they wish for. Mr Speaker, as we await the imminent Israeli incursion into Rafah, where 1.2 million people are sheltering, including 600,000 children, it has been reported that the United States has paused an arms shipment to Israel. The UK will now follow suit, won't it?
Well, Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman may not realise that the UK government doesn't itself directly provide arms or ship arms to Israel. And when it comes to the situation in Rafah, I've been very clear that we are deeply concerned about a full military incursion of Rafah, given the devastating humanitarian impact. I've made that position and point specifically to Prime Minister Netanyahu whenever we've spoken, and will continue to urge all sides to focus on the negotiations at hand to bring about a pause in the conflict, to release hostages and get more aid in.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr Speaker, let's be clear. The confidence that Israel has shown in its military ambitions in Rafah stems from the silence which has been shown from its allies on the front benches in this place and indeed elsewhere across the world. Now we all know that UK arms and tech is supporting Israel's activities in Gaza and will be used in any attack on Rafah. Knowing that and the devastation which is going to occur, surely the time has come to end our complicity and to halt arms sales to Israel.
Well, Mr Speaker, of course we take our defence export responsibilities extremely seriously, and that's why we operate one of the most robust licensing control regimes anywhere in the world. We periodically review advice on Israel's commitment to international humanitarian law, and ministers always act in accordance with that advice. And that is crystal clear for the House to understand. Our position with regard to export licences following the most recent assessment is unchanged, and I know that he will join me in urging all parties to engage in the negotiations that are happening so we can see a pause in fighting to get more aid in, hostages out, and then bring about a sustainable ceasefire to this conflict.
Martin Bickers.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituents in rural villages and on the fringes of the Grimsby-Cleethorpes urban area are very concerned about overdevelopment. They recognise that the highway infrastructure and public services are already overloaded. Could my right honourable friend consider amending planning guidance so that local plans and decisions taken by local planning authorities are not overridden by planning inspectors? And they'd be greatly encouraged if he would agree to meet with me and my colleagues from the neighbouring Gainsborough and Grimsby constituencies to discuss this further.
My honourable friend is right that sustainable development must be at the heart of the planning system, and that's why we're committed to meeting the needs for housing by building the right homes in the right places and protecting the environmental assets that matter most. The National Planning Policy Framework is clear that we should be responsive to local circumstances. I know that the relevant local plan in my honourable friend's area is due for further consultation later this year, and that he'll engage with that process, but I will happily meet with him and colleagues to discuss his situation further.
Ed Davey.
Mr Speaker, the abuse suffered by 88-year-old Anne King at the hands of staff in her care home was captured on a hidden camera. The footage is stomach-churning. Anne died in October 2022, and it took nearly a year before the CQC launched a criminal investigation. Now Anne's children are working to protect other care home residents from being subjected to such appalling abuse. Her son came to see me as his MP to ask for my help in their campaign. So will the Prime Minister join me in backing Anne's Law, a proposal to include a national register to professionalise the care workforce and hold those staff who are abusive to account? And will he meet with Anne's family and myself to discuss this idea?
Well, Mr Speaker, can I first of all extend my sympathies to Anne's family for what she went through. Obviously, that's not appropriate, and I'll make sure that the department engages with him and Anne's family on the proposed law. And he's right to say we should have high standards across the care industry, and we're walking towards more investment to support our care home staff, making sure that they have training, qualification to development, and we have a regime in place that can hold everyone to account for delivering the high standards that we would all expect.
Sarah Downs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that one of the greatest things that these backbenches bring to Westminster is plain old-fashioned common sense? And it's Derbyshire common sense. Derbyshire common sense that means that the good people of Ashbourne and surrounding villages reject the Sadiq Khan ULEZ rules and even the 20 miles an hour Welsh. Will he join with me and perhaps ask his neighbour if he will pay for the Ashbourne bypass?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know my honourable friend has been a dedicated campaigner for the Ashbourne bypass, and the government is committed to investing more in the Midlands, particularly investing every penny of the £9.6 billion from HS2 back into the local area. And she's right that we will focus on drivers and their priorities, not continue the war on motorists, which is waged by the Labour Mayor in London, but also the Labour Party in Wales, with both ULEZ and 20 mile an hour speed limits. It's this party that is unashamedly on the side of the motorist.
Emma Wilbur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Our Child of the North cross-party group found that expectant mothers were terminating unwanted pregnancies as they could not afford another mouth to feed. Recent figures show infant and child death rates have increased in the most deprived areas, and 50 children have died alone in unregulated accommodation. Is this his plan for a brighter Britain in action?
Mr. Speaker, obviously what the Honourable Lady has described is tragedy. Nobody wants to see children grow up in those circumstances, and that's why I'm proud that the government has overseen a significant fall in poverty, but particularly child poverty, since 2010 through a range of measures, and I'll make sure that she is aware for her constituents of all the support that is in place, both through the Department of Health and through the Department for Work and Pensions and local authorities, to provide support to the most vulnerable families in our communities.
John Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, Weston-super-Mare is a growing town, so local health services are rightly growing too. Weston Hospital is treating more patients for a wider variety of problems than before. GP surgeries are offering thousands more appointments this year than last, and our new diagnostic centre means faster tests and treatments. But there's a fly in our NHS prescribed ointment. Dentistry isn't fixed yet. The new dental recovery plan is very welcome, but when will it mean appointments that Westonians can book?
Mr. Speaker, our dentistry recovery plan will make dental services faster, simpler and fairer for patients, funding around £2.5 billion more appointments. And I was pleased to note that access is improving in my honourable friend's area, with almost 10% more children seeing a dentist in June last year than the previous year. But we are going further. The new patient premium that was announced last year is ensuring that more NHS dentistry will be provided. And since then, at the end of January, 500 more practices have said that they are now open to new patients.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's now been over a month since the Parliamentary Ombudsman delivered a long-awaited report on pension injustices. Yet women born in the 1950s in my constituency of Dundee, and indeed every constituency in this House across these islands, are still waiting to hear if the UK Government will listen to these recommendations and deliver compensation. Mr. Speaker, I was proud to see the Scottish Parliament support a motion last week calling for compensation to be delivered without delay, but utterly dismayed to see members of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party abstain. So can the Prime Minister finally set out when WSPI women will receive the compensation they rightly deserve?
Mr. Speaker, I understand the strong feelings across the chamber on this topic and the desire for urgency in addressing them. However, following the Ombudsman's 5-year investigation, it is imperative that we take the time to thoroughly review the comprehensive findings that have been published. An update to the House will be provided once the report's findings have been fully considered. More broadly, we are committed to ensuring pensioners have the dignity and security in retirement that they deserve, and most recently increasing the state pension by £900 thanks to the triple lock.
Sir Philip Davis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister as appalled as I am at reports of militant civil servant, trade union, political activists seeking to find ways not to implement the Rwanda deportations? Does he agree with me that if they are not prepared to implement the will of the government, an Act of Parliament that was passed by both Houses of Parliament, that they should conclude that being in the civil service is perhaps not for them, and maybe they can look for alternative employment at other left-wing organisations that masquerade as being impartial? Maybe they could try the BBC or Channel 4 News.
Mr. Speaker, my expectation is that civil servants will continue to be committed to supporting our priority of stopping the boats and deliver in accordance with the Civil Service Code. He'll know that we made specific changes to ensure compliance with that code as we push through with our plans. But I agree with him more broadly that we are the only party that has a plan to stop the boats, and we will face down all the obstacles in our way to deliver on this crucial priority for the British people. And whoever stands in our way, whether it's the Labour Party or others, we will deliver for this country on this vital issue.
Malcolm McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, China has now hacked the data of defence personnel, the Electoral Commission, various other public institutions, and has targeted many members of this House. And yet plans by China's largest wind turbine manufacturer, Mingyang Smart Energy, to build its largest European facility right here in the UK advance at pace, with the facility set to be built in Scotland. Given widely shared concerns about the involvement of hostile states such as China in the UK's critical national energy infrastructure, does he not agree that now is the time for this project to be paused, to be reviewed by the government on national security grounds? And if not, what message does he think that sends?
Well, as I've said repeatedly, China is a country with different values to ours and is acting in a way that is increasingly authoritarian at home and assertive abroad. It's right that we take firm steps to protect ourselves against that, particularly in the area of economic security, which is why this government passed the National Security and Investment Act, precisely so that we can screen transactions without commenting on individual ones, of course, to protect this country. And we have used those powers, not least to block Chinese investment in a sensitive semiconductor company, but also to ensure that the Chinese state nuclear company had no part in the future of our nuclear power. So he can rest assured that we're alive to the challenges and have passed laws that give us the powers to protect against them.
Charlize Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 5-year-old Benedict Blythe was a lovely little boy who attended a primary school in my constituency. Sadly, however, he died of anaphylaxis, a severe allergic reaction. The coroner's inquest has not yet reported, but speaking generally, on average, 2 children in every class have a food allergy, and allergic reactions take place more in school than in any other setting outside the home. Severe allergic reactions are on the rise and can be fatal. Yet there is no explicit legal requirement for schools to have allergy medication, an allergy policy, or other recommended safeguards being made available. There is only guidance. Will the Prime Minister meet with me and Benedict's parents, Helen and Pete, so that we can discuss a way forward to ensure that children who suffer from allergies in schools can be more safe, including schools having an allergy policy, adrenaline pens, and staff who know how to use them?
Well, firstly, can I extend my sympathy to Benedict's family? It's tragic always to hear about the loss of a child, and we fully understand the seriousness of severe allergies and believe that children with medical conditions should be properly supported to enjoy a full education and be safe at school. Now, there is a legal duty on the governing body of schools to make arrangements for supporting pupils, including setting out what needs to be done, symptoms, treatment, but I will ensure that my right honourable friend gets a meeting with the Health Secretary to discuss how we could further support pupils with serious allergies.
John Speller.
Yesterday, his Chancellor confirmed that it's government policy to abolish national insurance, a £46 billion annual cost, and no indication of where the money's coming from. So can the Prime Minister rule out further freezes on tax allowances or an 8p increase in income tax to pay for it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's total nonsense, and of course I rule that out. And let me just clear up. Mr. Speaker, there is no unfunded policy. What we have said is that we have a long-term ambition to keep cutting national insurance to end the unfairness of the double taxation on work. We'll make progress towards that goal in the next Parliament, just as we already have in this, by cutting national insurance by a third in 6 months, delivering a £900 tax cut, at the same time is increasing investment in the NHS and increasing the state pension. But it's increasingly clear what this reveals is that the Labour Party opposes tax cuts for working people.
Angela Richardson.
Thank you. Empowering local pharmacies is a key part of this government's plan to cut waiting lists. In Guildford, we recently lost 2 neighbouring pharmacies. But good news, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to report that by working diligently with local pharmacists, concerned residents, the Minister and the ICB, I have helped to secure a new pharmacy in Burford. Yeah. Will my right honourable friend join me in welcoming this new pharmacy, and does he agree that it is vital residents should have access to a good, efficient and above all local pharmacy? Yeah.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I care deeply about the future of our community pharmacies. I'm very pleased to hear about my honourable friend's success in securing a new pharmacy for her constituents, joining the 10,500 others across the country. And she's now right about the important role that our local pharmacies can play. That's why we're backing them with £645 million of additional funding through Pharmacy First, so that you can now go straight to your pharmacist, receive treatment for 7 of the most common ailments, saving you time and ensuring that patients get the care they need quicker and closer to home.
Mr. Speaker, last Friday, The Guardian reported major structural deficiencies at Stepping Hill Hospital in Stockport. Stepping Hill's major outpatients building, the radiology department and the critical care unit have all been condemned. In March, I met with senior officials at Stockport NHS Trust. They were very clear that a sustained lack of capital investment is the root cause of problems at my local hospital. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister believe that our hospitals, quite literally crumbling, is the price worth paying for the 14 years of successive Conservative failure?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we fully recognise the need to invest in health infrastructure across the country, including at Stepping Hill Hospital, and that's why we are currently spending around £4 billion a year for Trust to spend on necessary maintenance and repairs, on top of the £20 billion new hospital programme and the additional funding that was put aside to deal with RAC maintenance. But he talks about a legacy of the NHS. All he needs to do is look at his party's record in Wales, where people currently are experiencing the worst A&E performance and the longest wait times anywhere in Great Britain.
Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Nottingham City Council is expecting to fall short of its housing target by 6,000 new homes. Last time this happened, Rushcliffe, as a neighbouring authority, was forced to take thousands of homes on top of its own housing target, which led to huge pressures on our green spaces and public services. So can my right honourable friend reassure me and my constituents that the changes we've made to the planning system will mean that this time we will be protected from Labour's failure in Nottingham?
Yeah. Well, my honourable friend makes an important point, and while on this side of the House, the Conservatives believe in building the right homes in the right places, with local people having a say, all Labour would do is impose top-down housing targets on areas, decimating our precious countryside. And in Nottinghamshire, as she says, you can see the difference, Mr. Speaker, between the well-run Conservative County Council compared to the bankrupt Nottingham Council, which has left residents to pick up the bill from their profligacy.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Untreated sewage was pumped into English waterways for more than 3.6 million hours last year, and into the sea off Sussex beaches 3 times in the last 24 hours alone. Yet since privatisation, the water companies have been allowed to rack up debts of over £64 billion and their shareholders to pocket £78 billion in dividends. The majority of the public, including 58% of Conservative and 80% of Labour supporters, want to turf out the profiteering polluters. They want water brought back into public hands. When is he going to listen to them and end the legalised scam of privatisation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, our plans to tackle this have gone further than any other previous government. In fact, we now monitor 100% of overflows, up from just 7% under the Labour Party. We're investing a record £56 billion into our water infrastructure, and we've enshrined in law strict targets and introduced unlimited fines for water companies, holding them and their bosses to account. So it's crystal clear that the record shows that there's only one party who has a clear plan to tackle this issue for the environment, and it's the Conservative Party.
Final question, Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everybody knows that Stockton is a great place with great people and a great football team. My right honourable friend recently visited the mighty Stockton town to see the incredible work that they do in the local community and heard about their promotion battle. I'm sure he'll want to join me in congratulating Mickey Dunwell and the mighty Anchors on their promotion.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was fantastic to visit Stockton Town FC with my honourable friend, who is a brilliant champion for his local community, which I see firsthand on a weekly basis. And let me join him in congratulating everyone at the club on their well-deserved promotion, and I hope some of their good luck rubs off on Southampton in the coming weeks.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. We now come to the urgent question. I call Shabana Mahmood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State for Justice if he will make a statement on the expansion of the end of custody supervised licence scheme.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable lady for her question. Protecting the public is our #1 priority, and so it is right we take the tough and decisive action so we can keep putting the most serious offenders behind bars and for longer, as the public would rightly expect. We are carrying out the biggest prison expansion programme since the Victorian era and ramping up removals of foreign national offenders. We have a duty to make sure that the prison system continues to operate in a safe and effective way where offenders are held in safe and decent conditions. This means making sure that no prison exceeds a safe maximum operating limit. ECSL allows lower-level offenders to be released before their automatic release date. In March, the Lord Chancellor stated that we will work with the police, prisons and probation leaders to make adjustments as required. This extension is in line with what he said. ECSL operates only when it is absolutely necessary and is kept under constant review. I know that many members of this House will be concerned about the early release of offenders into the community, but let me be clear that only offenders who would soon be released anyway would be considered for ECSL. We have put in place safeguards, including that the prison service retains the discretion to prevent the ECSL release of any offender where releasing them earlier presents a heightened risk than if they were released at their automatic release date. There are strict eligibility criteria, and anyone convicted of a sexual offence, terrorist offence or a serious violent offence is ruled out. Public safety will always be our #1 priority, and all those released will still be subject to probation, supervision and stringent licence conditions.
Shall the Secretary Shabana Mahmood.
Mr. Speaker, here we go again. Never in this country has a government ever been forced to release prisoners over 2 months early. This is the price that the public is paying for a justice system in crisis and a government in freefall. In just 6 months, the early release scheme, Mr. Speaker, has now undergone 3 major extensions. It was quietly started in October, when the government began releasing prisoners up to 18 days early. In March, it was slipped out that it was expanded from 18 days to 60, and now it has emerged through a media leak that it has been extended once again, this time to 70 days. And worst of all, the government is doing all of this in secret. They haven't responded to any FOI requests, parliamentary questions, or even the Justice Select Committee with any useful details about this scheme. The government is releasing prisoners, but not the facts. The strategy is clear for all to see. Say nothing, try and get away with it, and get to the other side of the general election. It's shameless and frankly a disgrace. The public and this House rightly expect the Minister to be transparent and honest. So let's see if he'll answer these basic and simple questions. Why the increase of early release to 70 days? How many offenders have been released in the 6 months since the scheme became operational? How will they ensure that probation has the time and the resources to adequately assess risk and protect the public? And will he give a guarantee to the House today that this secretive scheme will not be extended again?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Shadow Secretary of State for her question. I would gently say to her a number of things. First of all, I think her suggesting sneaking it out in October and March, which included statements to this House, was entirely transparent. In terms of the Honourable Lady's party's record, I think operating an early release scheme for 3 years between 2007 and 2010 would leave her on rather shaky ground. She talked about a media leak. This was an operational decision with operational guidance sent out to HMPPS, to prison governors, as well as other stakeholders, including, if I recall, the probation union, for a minor change which was already reflected in the points made by my right honourable friend in March to this House. She talked about data. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has been consistently clear. We will publish the data on an annualised basis in exactly the same way as we do, for example, on deaths in custody and supplementary breakdowns of the prison population. We've been clear. We will always ensure that the prison system has the spaces to ensure that the courts can send people to prison. We are making an appropriate operational decision to ensure that continues to be the case. And she also asked about probation, and rightly so. And I suspect in our exchange, the one thing where we may find ourselves in agreement is paying tribute to those who work in our probation service. As she will know, since 2021, we have increased the budget for the probation service by £155 million, with 4,000 additional probation officers in training. We have worked with the leadership of our probation service on this scheme. And as I say, in terms of notifying people about the changes to the guidance, the operational guidance, the probation union was one of those we did notify.
Like Committee Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. This is in reality, Mr. Speaker. This is actually a perfectly rational and sensible, pragmatic response to the pressures in our prisons, and the Minister should take credit for having done that, but I would ask him to reconsider the point about transparency of data, precisely because it is a sensible thing to do. There's no reason why we shouldn't release the figures in greater time. But isn't there an underlying problem here that both parties in this House, all parties, have to face up to, that the pressures in our prisons, which the Justice Committee has referred to repeatedly, stem from decades of underfunding by governments of all parties, that prison at 46,000+ pounds a year for each place is a very expensive way of dealing with people and not always the best means for lower level offenders. Can we have a more intelligent debate about sentencing and the purpose of prison? And perhaps we could start with that by the Minister committing to bringing back the sentencing bill, which will enable us to have a more nuanced approach to this.
I'm grateful to my honourable and learned friend for his questions. He's right to highlight the ongoing capacity challenges and a number of drivers of those. One of those, as he highlights, is that, for example, the average custodial sentence in this country has gone up from 14 months to, I think, about 21 months. The remand population has gone up from about 9,000 to about 16,500, partly as a result of the COVID backlogs in the court system, partly as a result of the bar strike and the impact that that had on that. So he's right to highlight the drivers of this. In respect of publication of data, I would very gently, in the case of my honourable friend, very respectfully refer him to the answer I gave to his committee and at the dispatch box just now. But it's also important that alongside recognising the pressures the system's under, we are taking the steps to increase capacity, both through increasing removals of foreign national offenders and at a faster rate, but also having built almost 6,000 new prison places, in stark contrast to the record of the party opposite, who built not one of the 7,500 Titan prison places.
Well, there it was.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Court backlogs are sky high. Prisons are dangerously close to capacity, which is why we've had to see this policy implemented. And the government is claiming, the minister's just claimed, to be carrying out a big prison expansion programme, yet its record is appalling. In 2016, the government, in response to the Taylor Review, committed to building 2 secure schools for young offenders. Since then, the budget has spiralled out of control and not one of those schools has opened. Doesn't this all just prove that the Conservatives can't be trusted with our justice system?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and she knows I have a huge amount of respect for her, but I think even by Lib Dem standards that was stretching the bounds of credibility a little, not least, as she will be aware, we've built 2 new prisons. We have 3 that have now completed, 1 in construction, 2 have now completed planning, 1 is currently subject to a planning appeal. And in respect to the secure school, I think she should look forward to that opening in a matter of days.
Rob Battle.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask my honourable friend to expand a little bit on the great improvements that are being made to increase capacity? Can he tell us a little bit more about progress in ensuring that more foreign national offenders are removed to their own countries? And can he also expand a little, since it seems to be very badly understood by those on the other side of the House of all parties, quite how much of a programme we have got on this side of the House for prison building, the number of different prisons, the number of spaces that will create, and therefore the prospect for rehabilitation of offenders and consequently, in time, fewer victims of crime?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight that, and I pay tribute to his work in the justice system, not only in this House, but prior to his being a member of this House. In respect of FNO removals, I believe, and of course I'll correct it if I'm slightly out, around 16,000 FNOs have now been removed, and it's timely that, as I say that, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, appears, so I can pay tribute to him and his department for their work in delivering that. In terms of prison places, as I set out to the honourable lady, the member for Twickenham, progress on the 6 new prisons, but alongside that, of course, we've built a vast number of rapid deployment cells, new house blocks. So we are expanding our prison capacity rapidly, and as I say, that stands in stark contrast to the failure to deliver on the Titan prison places by the party opposite.
Rebecca Longvale.
Mr. Speaker, the National Association of Probation Officers have said that the ESCL scheme is an unmitigated failure and has not only been extended without parliamentary scrutiny, but represents an increasing risk to public safety. The Secretary knows our probation service is in crisis and it cannot cope without a significant increase in support and resources. Will the government be providing this?
I'm very grateful to the honourable lady, and I have, as I said, and share the view with the Shadow Secretary of State, great respect for the work done by those who work in our probation service, and indeed have met with the probation unions in the past, and although we don't always agree, I do have huge respect for the work that those unions do in representing their members. But I would make 2 points. Firstly, to say that it was done without scrutiny in this House, I think, is stretching the bounds of credibility. 2 statements by my right honourable friend, multiple oral parliamentary question sessions, and indeed myself undergoing a polite but thorough grilling in the Justice Select Committee by the chair of the Select Committee. So I don't think it stacks up to say that this has not been subject to scrutiny. To her underlying point, however, as I set out earlier, we are investing in probation, £155 million additional investment a year since 2021, and 4,000 more probation officers and probation staff in training.
Mr. Speaker, just a moment ago, the Minister set out the significant increase in the number of people being held on remand. I think he said from 9 to 16,000. Could the Minister just set out to the House the work that the government is doing to address the court backlogs and what steps he's taking to look at other routes for monitoring people who are on remand, who perhaps could serve that remand period in the community under a tagging system?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I think, actually, to correct myself, it's actually, I think, 16,500 now on remand out of the prison population. In terms of court backlogs, we have increased investment in our courts, we've increased the number of sitting days, and we are seeing progress being made. In terms of what we can do, though, to help give the courts, who obviously make the decision on whether to remand or whether to bail someone, the information they need, we continue to invest in the Bail Information Service, which gives the sentencer the reassurance, hopefully, and the information they need to make a judgment call as to whether someone is safe to be bailed. And we're increasing our investment in the CAS, the Community Accommodation Service, to make sure where someone may not be bailed because they don't have a stable address to go to, there is an increased opportunity for them to have that address to give sentencers the opportunity to bail them.
My God, very sure.
Mr. Speaker, I've been in this House long enough to, as the Minister and the Chairman of the Justice Select Committee knows, to know when something is a sticking plaster act from a government. This is, perhaps it's necessary, but it's a sticking plaster. We've had how many Queen's speeches since 2010, included in a thorough look at the justice system with a royal commission. It never happened. And we all know that you don't building prisons doesn't solve the crisis. We do need a radical reform of the whole of our justice system, and that would need extra resources and a real motivation from an incoming Labour government. Does he agree with me?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman with whom I've occasionally tussled across this chamber. And I agree with some of what he says. He won't be surprised now I don't agree with his last statement, in that, judging by the track record up to 2010, I fear it will be a case of let down by Labour were that to happen. However, I'm grateful for his typically thoughtful comments, actually, on this, and his looking at the bigger picture behind the challenges we face. It is right that we are putting those who commit the most serious crimes in prison for longer to protect society, but also to ensure that they pay their debt back to society. But it's also important we look at how we rehabilitate people when they are in prison, because we all want those who've served their time to come out and live their life within bounds in the community and be constructive and positive contributors to society. That's why we're focusing on getting people into employment. We're getting them the education they need in prison. I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, the member for Hampshire East, for his work and his focus on that when he was both Secretary of State for Education, but also then as my predecessor. And of course, there are measures before this House currently, or before Parliament currently, I should say, for example, in the sentencing bill, which offer this House an opportunity to think about other ways of doing things.
Savile Roberts.
This announcement comes after 9 prisoners have recently lost their lives in HMP Park in Bridgend, and the Ministry of Justice says they won't step in. Now, a private prison in Wales is an unaccountable anomaly that fails everyone, victims and prisoners alike. And while we anticipate the long-awaited devolution of justice, can you tell me why, after 25 years, there is still no clarity over which ombudsman is responsible for health in Park?
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady. While we may disagree in our proposition or our view on devolution of justice to Wales, she raises a very important issue in terms of those deaths in the past few months in HMP and YY Park. I visited Park recently and spoke to the Governor, the Director and others, both those in custody and those working in Park. I've got to be a little bit cautious about what I say, given the matter is will be before both the coroner and before the Ombudsman. What I would say is that I will be appearing before the Welsh Affairs Select Committee next week when I suspect some of this may be debated, but I've got to be a little bit careful. I'm happy to have a discussion with her, but I think it's right that I don't stray at the dispatch box when these matters are before thee.
And hopefully with the MPs whose constituents it is as well. Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for his answers to all the questions. The scheme was initially designed to allow for short-term early release over a matter of days, and yet some are now facing some 70 days. Can the Minister understand why victims of crime are anxious that the so-called soft crime criminals are getting an easier time, whilst the victims of crimes are told that perpetrators have been released early so that they can prepare themselves to see them again down the town or at the local supermarket, as examples, which can be extremely disconcerting, if not unexpected? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. Just to reassure you, Mr. Speaker, the member whose constituency it is in, I was due to be meeting actually at this moment in time, but I'm before the box. I'm here at the box, but I have got a date in the diary to reschedule that, so it has been arranged as I promised at the last oral parliamentary questions session, sir. In respect of the honourable gentleman, he's right to highlight the point, and that's why when it comes to ECSL, our protections are significantly more stringent than those used by the party opposite when it ran its scheme for 3 years. Unlike the party opposite, our scheme allows governors to veto the release of any prisoner where they think early release will create a risk to victims. It also contains a number of exemptions from the scheme. It also allows for very rigorous conditions to be placed on the licence for the release, be that tagging, be that exclusion zones, be that curfews, and they will be well aware that if they breach those conditions to protect victims, they will hear the clang of the prison gate and be recalled.
That completes the urgent question. We'll allow the front bench to change over. Right, we now come to the statement. I call the Home Secretary, James Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to make a statement to the House regarding measures that His Majesty Government will take in response to the reckless and dangerous activities of the Russian government across Europe and now suspected here in the UK. As reported on Friday the 26th of April, 5 individuals have been charged in connection with an investigation into alleged offences under the National Security Act as part of a counter-terrorism policing investigation. The offences relate to what was widely reported by the media as a suspected arson attack on a Ukraine-linked business in the UK. The Crown Prosecution Service has confirmed that the charges relate to alleged hostile activity in the UK in order to benefit a foreign state, namely Russia. I pay tribute to our law enforcement agencies for their quick and professional work to ensure that these charges were brought. The first charges to be brought under the new National Security Act. Measures which this government brought forward and which this House passed are already being used to keep our country safe. I also want to thank the emergency services who responded to the fire at the commercial property in London where the suspected activity took place. The charges here are serious, and it's only through good fortune that nobody was hurt. I want to reassure the House that public safety is of the utmost importance, which is why the law enforcement response has been quick and decisive. As members will appreciate, I must not say anything further on the specific case or any related case to avoid prejudicing the outcome of ongoing criminal proceedings. And I ask the House to respect this and to avoid using the debate to add to the speculation about this incident. It is vital that justice runs its course. However, I want to highlight to the House a pattern of suspected Russian activity that we are seeing across Europe. And of course, this is not the first time that we have uncovered malign activity seemingly linked to Russia in the UK in the past year. In September, 5 Bulgarian nationals were charged with conspiring to commit espionage activities in the UK on behalf of Russia. A 6th individual was later charged, and legal proceedings against all 6 are ongoing. There is a much broader pattern of Russian malign activity across Europe. These include plans for sabotage activities against military aid for Ukraine, in Germany and in Poland, espionage in Bulgaria and in Italy, cyber attacks and disinformation activities, airspace violations and GPS jamming with an impact on civil aviation. Over a number of years, we have witnessed Russia and its intelligence services engage in yet more open and more brazen attempts to undermine our security, harm our people, and interfere in our democracies. Litvinenko, Georgia, Crimea, Salisbury, Ukraine, and across Europe. And since the illegal invasion of Ukraine, the rhetoric, the threats, the accusations from Russia have only increased, as Putin seeks to justify the death and destruction that he has brought to the Ukrainian people. These activities bear all the hallmarks of a deliberate campaign by Russia designed to bring the war home across Europe and to undermine our collective resolve to support Ukraine in its fight. It will not work. As the Prime Minister said in Poland last month, we are at a turning point for European security. With our allies, we will stand firm in the face of Russian threats to the UK and to our way of life. It is why, after Salisbury, we took measures with our partners to make Europe a harder operating environment for Russian intelligence services, including the expulsion of 23 undeclared Russian intelligence officers from the UK. And it's why the UK has announced the biggest strengthening of the UK national defence in a generation, with a fully funded plan to grow the defence budget to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. And the UK and our allies will not falter in our support to Ukraine, because it is existential to the security of Europe. This is why the Prime Minister has also announced an uplift to military aid to Ukraine, bringing it to £3 billion this year, and has committed to this level of support every year until the end of the decade, or indeed longer if it is sadly still required. And we have sanctioned over 1,700 individuals, over 90% of the Russian banking sector, and over 130 oligarchs and family members with a combined net worth of £147 billion at the time of the invasion. And as of October, over £22 billion of Russian assets were reported frozen as a result of UK sanctions. These assets can no longer be taken back to Russia to fund Putin's war machine. We consider Russia's campaign to undermine our support to Ukraine unacceptable, and it is destined to fail. We must wait, of course, for the ongoing criminal cases across Europe, including here in the UK, to conclude. But given these allegations, the government will not wait to take further action to send a strong deterrence message to Russia and to further reduce its ability of the Russian intelligence services to threaten the UK. That is why today, Mr. Speaker, in conjunction with my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, I am announcing a package of measures to make clear to Russia that we will not tolerate such apparent escalations. So I can tell the House that we will expel the Russian defence attaché, who is an undeclared military intelligence officer. We will remove diplomatic premises status from several Russian-owned properties in the UK, including Seacock's House, a Russian-owned property in Sussex, and the Trade and Defence section in Highgate, which we believe have been used for intelligence purposes. And we are imposing new restrictions on Russian diplomatic visas, including capping the length of time Russian diplomats can spend in the UK. The measures we and our international partners have taken in recent years have already made the UK an extremely challenging operating environment for Russian intelligence services. These further measures that I have described will only serve to strengthen our resilience to the Russian threat. Our NATO allies share our view of Russia's alleged behaviour, as seen in the North Atlantic Council statement of last week. Russia has failed to provide any explanation for these events. In the coming days, we should expect accusations of Russophobia, conspiracy theories and hysteria from the Russian government. This is not new, and the British people and the British government will not fall for it and will not be taken for fools by Putin's bots, trolls and lackeys. Russia's explanation was totally inadequate. Our response will be resolute and firm. Our message to Russia is clear. Stop this illegal war. Withdraw your troops from Ukraine. Cease this malign activity. Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
As the Secretary of State himself noted, he referred to a live case at the beginning of his statement. This case is sub judice, and I ask other members not to refer to it in their questions. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of the statement. It is the first job of any government to keep our country safe from those who wish to do us harm, not least those who wish to undermine our democracy and everything we stand for. And we pay tribute to the remarkable work of our intelligence and security services, our law enforcement agencies at home and abroad, who strain every sinew to keep us safe. And we will always work with the government on those national security issues. The arson attack the Home Secretary describes was a very serious one. The charges now laid are important. We support the work of law enforcement in this case, and it's immensely important nothing is done to cut across that criminal justice case now. So I simply ask for the Home Secretary's reassurance that a wider investigation is underway, not just into these specific offences, but into the wider context and any wider threats to our national security that might be linked to this incident. The Home Secretary has been clear in linking these charges to Russia, and we echo the Home Secretary's strong condemnation of Russian interference and hostile activity here in the UK and throughout Europe. Repeatedly, we have seen a brazen disregard by Russia for the rule of law, for the UK, for our allies, for our domestic security. And as my right honourable friends, the shadow Foreign and Defence Secretaries, have made clear, we stand shoulder to shoulder with the government in our support for Ukraine. Any change in government will not change that strong cross-party support as we stand with our allies. Putin must be defeated in Ukraine, and Britain must stand full square behind our Ukrainian friends. Russia under Putin is a long-term, generational threat to the security of Europe, which requires a long-term response. And as my right honourable friend, the Shadow Defence Secretary, said just yesterday, the defence of the UK starts in Ukraine. But as the Home Secretary has made clear, these challenges are also to our homeland security, and that is why we support wholeheartedly the measures the Home Secretary has set out today, just as we worked on a cross-party basis with the government to pass the National Security Act, and we will work closely with them in going further. But can I ask him a few further questions about these measures and about what further measures the government may be able to take? And ask him whether he expects there to be a diplomatic response from Russia. Can I ask him also, we saw obviously to such appalling extent in Salisbury very many years ago, the willingness of Russian-sponsored actors to put the safety of British citizens and British residents at risk. We've seen the cyber threats, the threats to undermine our democracy and our economy. But I am concerned that we have known about the scale of these threats for some time, and in areas we have been too slow to respond. It has been too slow to rid the UK of illicit finance. He will know that concerns have been raised about prohibited imports of Russia-origin oil through third countries making their way to UK shores. Can he tell me what action is being taken to ensure that those sanctions are being enforced? He will know that there is real concern still that the UK is still too easy for lawyers, accountants and for the laundering of Russian money through the UK that potentially aids and abets Putin's war. The US has seized huge amounts of Russian-related assets as part of the sanctions evasion and charged over 70 individuals with sanctions evasion. Can he confirm that no one has yet been charged with sanctions evasion in the US? Can he set out what is being done to address sanctions evasion? The government has said in principle it supports the seizing of Russian assets to fund Ukraine reconstruction, but there have been no proposals to take that forward. Can he tell us what is happening there? We have also still not had a full account of the scale of risks from golden visas. And he will know too that there are threats to our democracy. The work of the Defending Democracy Task Force, I would say to him, I believe is far too limited. And whilst the Security Minister is working on this, can I ask him what engagement he as Home Secretary has had and whether this has been discussed at the National Security Council too? And finally, the update to the government's integrated review warned in March last year that the transition into a multipolar, fragmented and contested world has happened more quickly and definitively than anticipated. And it refers to the Iranian-sponsored kidnap and kill threats on UK soil, the repression of Hong Kong protesters outside of the Chinese consulate in Manchester. The UK has undergone, not just because of the behaviour from Russia, but more widely, a fundamental shift in the threat landscape as increasingly aggressive state actors feel emboldened to target the UK, often doing so in cooperation with serious unorganised crime. So can I urge him to look at the work that was done after the huge shift in the terror threat that we faced after 9/11 and after 7/7 to draw up the contest strategy. We do not have a similar contest strategy for state actors and state-sponsored threats. The work is far too fragmented. We in the Labour Party would like to see a comprehensive contest equivalent. Can I urge him to look again at that, and we will work with him on that too.
Home Secretary, 1 minute on.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for the various points that she made in her question about her party's commitment to the ongoing support for Ukraine in its self-defence. She was right to read it into the record. There is no doubt about her commitment from this side of the House. She asked a number of she sought my reassurance that we do look at the wider threats emanating from Russia. I can reassure her that we do. Of course, we liaise closely with our international partners, those other countries in the coalition of support to Ukraine, which we suspect are being targeted by Russia, and indeed the countries will take their discrete domestic actions. But I draw the attention to the point I made about the shared commitment as set out in the North Atlantic Council statement. I don't have the precise quote in front of me, but from memory it said nations will take both individual and collective action. So our response is calibrated. It is designed to send a very, very clear message, as well as hampering Russia's ability to conduct espionage here in the UK, but it is calibrated. Of course, we will look closely to see what response Russia puts forward, to see whether they seek to escalate this. But we will always make sure that we protect our ability to have lines of communication with Russia, even during these most challenging of times. Routes for de-escalation of error avoidance and the avoidance of miscalculations are really important. We recognise that. I believe Putin's regime in Moscow recognise that, so we will seek to maintain lines of communication even whilst we take these decisive actions. With regard to sanctions, of course, we have put an extensive, we moved quickly, we moved in concert with our international friends and allies, and those sanctions are having an effect. Of course, Russia seeks to evade sanctions where we can, and whilst that is primarily the response of the HM Treasury in terms of sanctions enforcement, it is of course a cross-government piece of work, and all parts of government, and this was very much the case when I was Foreign Secretary, speaking with our international counterparts and interlocutors to try and close off those opportunities for sanctions evasion. We will, she mentions about the Defending Democracy task force. This is incredibly important, particularly as we head towards a general election. We will, of course, adapt. We will seek to work cross-party because it's in all our interests that we defend democracy, and I will continue to ensure both the Security Minister and I work closely with the Shadow Front Bench and other opposition parties' front bench teams to protect something that is so incredibly valuable.
Manchester.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the statement and the update by the Secretary of State. The United Kingdom has led the world in supporting Ukraine militarily, economically and diplomatically. Our key ally, the United States, has introduced legislation, and it was put forward by Congressman French Hill, my counterpart in the British-American Parliamentary Group, on the seizing Russian assets and using those assets to rebuild Ukraine, reconstruction of Ukraine. I have put forward a similar bill in Parliament, which is due for a second reading on the 17th of May, and I've written to the Foreign Secretary on that. Can the Home Secretary clarify if the United Kingdom will support those measures that the United States has, because it's absolutely crucial we do everything we can to cut off Putin's finances and make sure that he pays for the reconstruction of Ukraine?
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, of course, we work very closely with our international allies with regard to putting pressure on the Russian regime. We will look closely at the detail of the proposals that are going through the United States system. Of course, there is a very big difference between the freezing of assets, the seizing of assets, in order to go from one to the other would need close international cooperation, coordination, and to make sure that we always act within the rule of law. We do not want to inadvertently find ourselves at the receiving end of criticism from a regime such as Putin's, that we are stepping outside the bounds of international law. But we have absolutely made it clear. We will be incredibly imaginative. We will work hard to ensure that the regime and the people that have funded the brutal attack on Ukraine are also those that fund the rebuilding of Ukraine, and we work with our international partners to make sure that's a reality.
We come to SNP spokesperson Stuart M. MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of his statement and, like him, pay tribute to those in law enforcement who work so diligently to counter these types of threats. Of course, these types of threats are extremely well known and understood right across Europe. Disinformation, other types of hybrid threats are now a feature of democratic life in this country and elsewhere. And I think what that needs, Mr. Speaker, is a comprehensive sea change in how we approach that threat, a new whole-of-society approach to dealing with hybrid threats. I'm fine to support the government's increase in defence spending, but really what we need is new thinking, new doctrines, new institutions in order to compete against threats that are ever-evolving, becoming more sophisticated, more aggressive, and also extremely well-funded. I want to focus in particular on the threat on disinformation, especially because we're in an election year. It used to be the case that the government would provide Parliament, I can't quite recall when this stopped, with a 6-monthly update on the threat posed by Daesh. Can we have a similar type of statement on hostile disinformation? A written statement to Parliament on a regular basis, informing members of where that threat is and what's being done to meet it. Can I echo the comments that have been made about pressing the government to ensure sanctioned money is converted into Ukrainian hryvnia to allow that country to rebuild? I won't press the Minister on that any further. He knows our views on it. But I would also point out, whilst I welcome the seizure of the assets he mentions in his statement and the expulsion of the defence attaché, there are tons of assets in Scotland, I can tell him, land, estates and much else, that could also be seized. And if he chooses to look into that any further, he will certainly have our support.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's very important we are precise in our use of language. The Russian assets have been sanctioned. They have been frozen, and there is a very important legal difference between freezing and seizing. And it's important. No one has, as far as I'm aware, no one has seized or liquidated Russian assets. But of course, we abide by our commitment to make sure that the people that funded the brutality fund the reconstruction, and we are absolutely committed to that. I've taken a note of the point he made about regular updates, particularly as disinformation and distortions of our democracy and society have a more direct and immediate effect in the UK than perhaps the activities of Daesh. So I will take on board the practicalities of how much detail we might be able to put in the public domain. But we have, the government has set aside significant amounts of money to the Defending Democracy Task Force and the work streams that flow out from that to help parliamentarians and candidates at the forthcoming election defend themselves both physically and digitally against assaults that might come from them. We are constantly looking at ways to make sure that is effective as possible. And with regard to the the points he made about international cooperation, of course we will continue to work very, very closely with our allies, because our self-defence has got to be collective if it's going to be fully effective.
Christopher Blount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wholeheartedly support every word that the Home Secretary has said today. He is absolutely right. Putin has been engaged now for at least 10 years, arguably longer, in a sustained, hostile and malign set of actions against the UK and our allies. And on occasions when we have not been as overt in our opposition, I think he's taken advantage of that. So I'm glad that the Home Secretary has taken this action today. He knows all the things I'm going to ask him about. Why is there still Russian oil coming into the UK? Why is Russia still exporting the same amount of oil as it did before sanctions were introduced? Why have we still not gone as far as the Americans and the Canadians in seeking to not just freeze but seize Russian assets so that we could state assets so that they can be used for the development of Ukraine? Why has the Abramovich money still not gone to Ukraine? Because that would be more than £3 billion, more than the amount that the UK has so far devoted. And finally, can you just say a word about Vladimir Kara-Murza? For a man many of us have met here, very, very brave. We want to make sure that the UK government is doing everything in its power to make sure that he is protected in Russia.
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman has asked a number of questions, which some of which are very much in the remit of the Foreign Secretary. The Deputy Foreign Secretary will answer in this House on his behalf, but I can let him know that the answers that I have previously given to him and have been given from the Foreign Office will have remained unchanged. We, of course, work with our international partners because it has to be sanctions evasion, and the fight against sanctions evasion is by nature an international act. As I say, enforcement is predominantly a HMT competency, and the international cooperation falls very much within the remit of the FCDO. But of course, we all work to try and ensure that sanctions evasion does not happen. I'm going to have to correct him. A number of countries are investigating what a seizure and liquidation of Russian assets regime might look like. No country has seized and liquidated Russian assets. And as I say, so we will continue to work with our international partners to exploring ways of ensuring that the people who've paid for the brutality paid for the regime. But to say that other countries have done this is not accurate.
Berisham.
Mr. Speaker, can I say what a pleasure it is that we're taking this seriously? And the words of the Home Secretary filled me with renewed optimism, because I think we need both optimism and action. And does he agree with me that we can never underrate the Russians and Vladimir Putin? The fact of the matter is they are very clever. And they are using strategies, whether they're financial or whether they're using dupes in Europe and other places to channel their influence. We have to be wary at every level. Does he think that our intelligence services are equipped to cope with the real challenge that we now have from Russia and indeed from China? And has he picking up what I'm picking up from a lot of my old friends in Washington, that they're not only very disturbed about Russian influence on American elections, I have heard very strong information that they believe that some of the influence coming from Russia via London and from the United Kingdom, and that is a real problem. And can we make sure, and he knows I've got this to be in my bonnet, there are people in this Parliament have been named as very close to Russia. We have a member of the House of Lords featured in a main article in the Times only 2 weeks ago. A member of the House of Lords. Surely we must make our House and our Parliament as clean and as above board as absolutely possible. And if there are groups or individuals in this place, we should know about it.
I presume there was a question.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman speaks with great knowledge and passion about these incredibly important issues. He will, of course, understand that I will not go into detail about intelligence and security matters, but I can reassure him and I can reassure the House that both our intelligence services, the external-facing services, and our security services are incredibly effective, are without doubt amongst the best in the world, and I would perhaps rather arrogantly suggest are the best in the world. Both in my experience as Home Secretary and my former role as Foreign Secretary, I have seen the positive diplomatic influence that our agencies bring on our behalf. They are regarded very, very highly by our allies and international partners. And so, without going into detail, I hope that he and the House can feel reassured that we are in good hands. However, of course, we have to recognise that, just as the honourable gentleman has said, Russia takes pride in its long history of disinformation and propaganda and compromat. They wear it as a badge of honour. They are constantly evolving their threats towards us, so we have to constantly evolve our defences. I can reassure him that we are doing that. The National Security Act is part of that, but we reserve the right to take further action if Russia were to be foolish enough to escalate or attempt, once again, the actions that we believe they have taken in our country.
Gaskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Neither prosecutions nor penalties have been applied to those who are importing Russian oil refined in and branded as Indian or other countries. And yet, at the same time, the threat of closure hangs over Grangemouth refinery. The world knows that this is ongoing. Grangemouth is aware of the threat that faces them and industrialisation in Scotland. Is it not time that the Minister spoke to colleagues to ensure that not just state security but energy security is considered, and that a refinery capacity remains in Scotland, and at the same time that those who are profiting from bringing in Russian oil should in fact be prosecuted?
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, this government is completely committed to ensuring energy security. Whilst it has not been universally applauded, the licences that we have awarded to ensure that there is a vibrant hydrocarbons industry in Scotland is important. It's important for jobs, it's important for the Scottish economy, it's important for the UK economy, and it is important for energy security. So I can reassure him and the House that energy security will remain at the forefront of our minds. He makes the point about conversation about sanctions evasion, particularly about oil and gas sanctions evasion. I can assure him that my Right Honourable Noble friend Lord Cameron and I, when I was Foreign Secretary, raised these issues internationally with those countries still trading with Russia at every opportunity.
Jim Shannon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I very much thank the Secretary of State for his statement and welcome his clear commitment. Encourages all in this House and across this great nation whenever the Secretary of State comes to make his commitment. Bearing in mind the overnight raid on Ukraine's energy facilities and the continued aggression carried out when our eyes are turned very much to the Middle East, does the Secretary of State not believe that we must send a very swift, strong message to Putin that we are approaching the point where decisive action must be taken by the Allies and that we have both capacity and the will to intervene against the despicable war being waged and carried against the Ukrainian people? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman raises an important point I want to reinforce. It was quite clear that Vladimir Putin thought that the UK and our wider allies would be either distracted or dissuaded from supporting Ukraine when he initiated his full-scale invasion. Nothing could have been further from the truth. And if he thought that the evolving situation in Gaza, the terrorist attack against Israel and their military actions to defend themselves would again distract us from our support to Ukraine or our self-defence against Russian malign activity, again, he would be mistaken. So I can reassure the honourable gentleman in the House that whilst, of course, we are very focused on the situation in Gaza and southwest Israel and the wider Middle East region, we are not going to lose sight of our commitment to the Ukrainians in their self-defence and to re-establish the fact that you cannot redraw national borders by force.
That completes the statement, so let the front bench clear. We now come to the next statement to call Minister Tom Pesler.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will make a statement about disruption at the border. At around 7:45 last night, the Home Office became aware of a significant IT outage. Investigations determined that the incident was caused by technical issues within the Home Office network. The relevant teams quickly swung into action and a technical response was underway within 6 minutes. Once the fault was identified, officials worked closely with partners to rectify the problem and restore service. I joined a gold call with the lead officials at midnight last night, and the issue was resolved shortly before midnight. My information this morning is that all impacted systems have been restored and the incident has been formally closed with all due diligence checks completed. At this stage, I can assure the House and the wider public that all security checks were maintained throughout. Border security was not compromised at any point, and there is no indication of malicious cyber activity. Police access to operational systems was unaffected. As a result of the outage, there were delays at some airports, as members will be aware. The queues remain manageable and within health and safety parameters. Staff on the ground supported passengers, including through the provision of water, and ensured welfare needs were met. While undoubtedly inconvenient, the delays were necessary to maintain the integrity of our border. That is not to minimise the impact of the disruption, and I realise this will have been frustrating for all those affected. I offer my thanks to passengers for their patience as urgent activity was mounted to resolve the incident. I also place on record my gratitude to all the personnel who are involved in the response, including staff within the Home Office and Border Force and at airports. Mr. Speaker, I realise there will be a number of questions arising from this occurrence. I will, of course, do my utmost to provide as much information as possible, with the caveat that detailed work to understand the circumstances is ongoing. As the House and the public would expect, comprehensive activity to ascertain all relevant information about what happened will be undertaken in earnest in the coming days. Any incident involving our border systems causes concern. That is perfectly understandable. It is, though, worth putting this in context. Border Force facilitated over 132 million passenger arrivals last year, consistently processing over 90% of passengers within service standards. As I've said, security was maintained at all times, an urgent response was mounted, and the issue was fully resolved in a matter of hours. Nonetheless, I sincerely apologise for the disruption that occurred. I can assure the House that the Home Secretary and I will be unswerving in our determination to ensure that every possible lesson is learned, to ensure that this does not happen again, and I know that will be the objective of everyone across the Home Office. The security, integrity and effectiveness of the UK border is paramount. It is my foremost priority and will be for the entirety of the time that I have in this role. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Dan Jarvis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister for his statement and for advance sight of it? And at the outset, let me join with him in paying tribute to the staff who responded swiftly to resolve last night's e-gate network outrage. Their actions should be commended. And I also think, as the Minister did, it's right to pay tribute to the passengers who waited patiently for many hours, some of them after very long flights. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, our border security is not and should not be a dividing issue, and the Minister has done the right thing coming to the House today with the aim to provide clarity and reassurance on this extremely important matter. However, I am sure that the House will agree that the chaotic scenes across many of the UK's major airports last night are unacceptable, not least given e-gates have failed on several occasions in recent years. The system collapsed at the start of the late May bank holiday weekend in 2023 because of a failed system upgrade. And in 2021, technical issues caused the gates to fail 3 times in 2 months. That is unacceptable. And it brings into sharp focus how the current high-capacity e-gate system is no longer reliable enough and risks further damaging public trust in the government's management of our border security. Furthermore, whilst the Minister made clear that last night's e-gate failure was due to technical issues, not malign activity, the Home Office and Border Force must be making every effort to ensure that any such technical issues do not expose vulnerabilities to the system that could be exploited by our adversaries, be they state or non-state malign actors. Madam Deputy Speaker, Britain's border system should at all times allow lawful entry into our country and stop illegal entry. The safety and security of our country depends on it. So, I'd be grateful if the Minister could answer the following questions. Firstly, at this stage, is he able to confirm if the same technical issue responsible for previous e-gate failures is behind the events of last night? And if so, what urgent action will be taken to ensure it is finally resolved? Secondly, does the Minister believe the contingency plan for a national e-gate failure worked last night? And what does he deem to be an acceptable wait time for processing entries into the UK when e-gates fail? Thirdly, is he able to share figures on how many Border Force officers were redirected from other vital duties to manually process entries into the UK last night? And were there backlogs in other parts of the border system because of it? And while he's answering questions about mobility and security at the border, can I ask him to give a guarantee that full preparations are in place at Dover to avoid queues when the European entry and exit checks are introduced in the autumn? And finally, can he take the opportunity today to give an assurance that another national e-gate failure won't happen again on his watch? Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope the Minister will take these questions in the constructive spirit they are intended, and if he isn't able to answer them today, will you write to my colleague, the Honourable Member for Aberafon and me? Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, there cannot be another repeat of the chaos seen at Britain's border last night, and the government must do everything it can to resolve these persistent problems once and for all. The public must have faith that the UK's border security system still works.
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Shadow Minister for the tone in which he has approached this statement today and the response on behalf of His Majesty's opposition. And I would again just like to reiterate the thanks and appreciation that were reflected in his remarks to Border Force staff and teams within the airports, but as well as that, alongside working with the airlines respectively to support passengers during this period of disruption. And again, I would like to place on record my apologies sincerely to all those passengers who are affected by this issue last night. I can understand their frustrations and I sincerely apologise for it. He specifically asked about whether the contingency plan that was in place worked. We will always, of course, learn lessons from contingencies and evolve those models and make sure that we are responsive to feedback. But I think it is fair to say that overall the contingency plans did work last night, with that strong partnership underpinning them, working with the airlines, working with the airports, and of course leadership on that from Border Force teams. He also asked me specifically again about whether border security was compromised. I can confirm that border security was not compromised. Proper checks were undertaken in the way that you would expect, just not in the automated manner that people would wish to see, with greater manual processing of cases, but relying upon the underlying systems. Again, it demonstrates that the contingency plans that we put in place for incidents like this were robust, that they did work. The issue and the response to it was triggered within 6 minutes. We then saw the operational contingency beginning within an hour, and that has subsequently been assured as well to ensure that integrity of the border was maintained at all times. On the point around the security breach aspect, let me again be clear that this was not a cyber attack, but he's right in the point that he makes about the need for us always to be vigilant when it comes to border security and making sure that our IT systems that underpin that are able to withstand those sorts of pressures, and that is something that we continue to factor in the work that we are taking forward through our future borders endeavours. And when it comes to the root cause of how we got to this point in the first place, as soon as the fix was put in place, the posture changed to get to a place where we better understand the root cause of what has happened. That work is ongoing. It wouldn't be right for me to speculate, but I can absolutely assure him that we will get to the bottom of this. In terms of the specific technical issue last night, I am assured that the technical team are confident that there is now a permanent fix to this specific issue. And when it comes to general e-gate reliability, over 90 million passengers use e-gates each year, and we're world leading in their use. This is an extremely rare occurrence. He will recognise the fact that you can never guarantee that any IT system will ever be 100% reliable 100% of the time, but that is why it's imperative that robust contingencies are in place to underlie any of these systems to maintain the integrity of our border. We are clear as a government that we must never compromise border security, and we didn't. The border was operational, albeit it was slower than that which any of us would like, and for which I am sorry. And I think it also demonstrates why actually the automation at the border and the e-gates are so important as part of the way in which people enter the country. Without them, you would see the sort of operation that we saw last night all of the time. So it underpins why they are so important. And in fact, last year, over 90% cleared the border within 30 minutes, which does demonstrate, I think, just how integral this is and why we place a real emphasis on making sure that there is an availability of e-gates. And as I said earlier, we will get to the bottom of this. And finally, on the point that he's asked about the EU entry-exit system, we've had a number of opportunities in the House in recent weeks to debate that. there is an enormous amount of cross-government work going on at the moment to ensure that we have the best possible plans in place. My honourable friend, the Transport Minister, who is in his place, and I are working very closely together on this alongside colleagues from across government, as well as engaging thoroughly with our EU and French counterparts. We've made real progress in recent weeks and will continue to sustain that effort.
Ian Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I press the Minister a little further on the reliability of the airport's contingency plans when we have failures like this? As he has alluded to, this is not the first time it has occurred. And I'd be interested to know what lessons have been learned from previous handlings that were deployed on this occasion, particularly for supporting passengers who might be elderly, have disabilities, young families, or require additional care and support, so that they are not unduly suffering during the delays.
Minister.
My honourable friend, the chairman of the Transport Select Committee, is right to raise these concerns about passengers and their experience. As I say, this was a highly regrettable situation, but the response to this swung into action very quickly. It is fair to say that we always iterate, we always learn. It's probably the case again that we won't have got everything 100% right when it comes to the immediate response. But I think that there was a genuine effort, coordinated across border force, with airlines, with the airports, to support particularly vulnerable passengers. I think it's worth saying, actually, that I have had messages from individuals who were at airports last night who said to me that they were impressed by the contingency that was in place. But there are always things that we can learn from those efforts, and we will do exactly that. Our contingencies always have to be iterated. We always have to be responsive. The integrity of our border is of the utmost importance, and particularly supporting vulnerable people when things go wrong is at the forefront of our considerations.
SNP spokesman Chris Stevens.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Labour shadow team had said, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the third e-gate failure in a year, and we've already seen just weeks ago the travellers in Edinburgh, Manchester and Bristol facing hour-long queues. Now, it sounds like the Minister is conducting a thorough investigation, if he could just confirm that, and if he can confirm that he will report these findings to the House in a future statement. Can he also tell us that the problem this time appeared to not just affect e-gates themselves, but Belfast International Airport, for example, which doesn't have e-gates, said that the border force systems had been impacted. So could he please clarify that issue? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Home Office have been talking for a long time about introducing other technological innovations in order to carry out its business and its work. What lessons does he think that this particular example gives in relation to going forward in the future?
Minister.
Well, can I also just thank the Shadow SNP spokesman for his constructive tone that he has taken in raising this. There was a number of points there that he raised. I can absolutely guarantee to him that there is a thorough investigation ongoing to get to precisely what it was that went wrong. The technical team are confident that the fix that has been put in place addresses the issue, but we of course want to understand the underlying root causes of what went wrong last night to ensure that the system is as robust as it can possibly be to withstand any of those technical challenges moving forward. And I will gladly take away the point that he raises about updating the House and consider how that can best be achieved. On the point that he raises in relation to Belfast Airport, if he doesn't mind, I'd like to take that point away and speak to Border Force officials about that and provide him with a written update. And when it comes to the wider delivery of what is actually a considerable programme of change at our domestic border over the course of the coming months, he will recall that we are rolling out changes through the electronic travel authorisation scheme. We've been delivering that in phases. The early indications have been good. It allows us to have much greater information upstream about passengers before they arrive at our border, which of course helps us to tackle threats before they travel, which is an improved situation and allows us to understand more about passengers who currently we know very little about before they set off to come to the United Kingdom, as opposed to trying to deal with those issues at the border, as well as introducing measures like e-visas, which again is a really important part of our programme to digitise the border. I think it's important to say that there will always be a physical border force presence at our airports to ensure. Well, the honourable gentleman, the member for Rhondda, remarks on that. I wanted to make that point clear to the House, because I think there is always a place for technology. There is an important role for automation to play, but it's right that there is always that physical presence too, to be able to support people who arrive through our ports to make sure that we can respond to any issues. And what the automating process will allow us to do is to focus more increasingly on risk and to deploy border force officers to deal with that in greater volumes, as well as improving the passenger experience. So he's right to raise this. Any and all learning will be taken forward as we develop those processes and as we take those programmes forward. But I'm confident that the plans that we have around them is robust, and we will get on and deliver on the commitments that we've made.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whenever there are malfunctions of the e-gates at the UK border, it is the airport operators, including Gatwick in my constituency, which of course have to bear the brunt of the congestion that is caused by the delays that result. As the Home Office updates the e-gates system with new technology, what assurances can he give me that he will engage, and the Home Office will engage with the airport operators to ensure that they are very much part of ensuring that we have both a secure but free-flowing border?
Minister.
My honourable friend recognises, I know, the importance of the digitisation that we are taking forward of our border from a security perspective, from an efficiency perspective, but also from a customer service perspective, all of which is very important to the various airlines as well as the airport operators. My understanding is that consistently there has been significant engagement around the work that we are taking forward through the Future Borders programme, as well as routine engagement that is conducted with border force officials. I think that was reflected actually in the work that we saw on the ground last night in responding to this issue, actually, how strong those links, how strong those connections are. But we must never be complacent about this, and when it comes to the programmes that we're developing and that we've made commitments to deliver, I can guarantee to him that we will sustain that drumbeat of engagement. I am keen to lean into that as the Minister. Officials will continue to do that as well. And I'm very grateful, actually, for my honourable friend's efforts in raising issues and concerns from Gatwick Airport. He is a very diligent representative of his local area, and I'm really appreciative of his input.
Sir Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I commend the Minister for making a statement today. It's good to see such transparency. Can he just clarify, how long did it take from the moment that the service went down to its restoration? Was it an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? What's the longest period that passengers had to wait? If it wasn't a cyber attack and there was no malicious activity, as he said, what actually was it? Is it a problem with the IT itself, some kind of glitch, kind of horizon kind of glitch? Or is it the physical operations of the barriers themselves? And I note that last night is not the day with the largest number of travellers in the UK. We will have further days later on this year when we could have significantly larger numbers, for instance, the Whitsun Bank holiday. What measures is he putting in place to make sure that there are sufficient contingency measures, just in case it does go down again?
Minister.
Again, can I just thank the honourable gentleman for the way in which he has put his questions. Many passengers saw waits of around 2 to 3 hours last night as they were processed through the border. And as I was able to set out in my opening remarks as part of this statement, the fix began to take effect at around midnight. So there were several hours between the issue first becoming known about, the response to that kicking in around 6 minutes later, to then finally getting to the point with which that fix began to make a difference at around 12:30. He has asked about what more we can do on the contingency side. I think there will be learning that comes out of last night. We will take that on board. There will be opportunities for us to discuss that and to evaluate, working with the airports, working with the airlines. As I've said consistently, I think it proved, the response last night, that actually there is robust contingency planning in place. It did make a difference. It did mean that the integrity of the border was maintained. But I am sorry about the fact that passengers had a longer wait than any of us would want to see. And when it comes to what the specific technical issue is, what I'm not going to do is to preempt the work that is ongoing at pace within the department to get to the bottom of the specifics of that. But of course, we will respond to it, and any learning that is required that flows from that will happen.
Michael Longley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I say the British people are world renowned for their patience in queuing, and I'd like to thank the Minister for his statement and for his apology, especially for my own Dudley constituents. I think the part that my constituents would struggle with more is his position on wanting to say how it is a #1 priority to make sure that our borders are 100% secure, and that is a priority, when my same constituents can see hundreds, if not 1,000 a day, landing on the beaches with no documentation whatsoever, are allowed to stay in this country, go on to commit crime, and several years later are still allowed to stay in this country. That's a very real frustration and an understanding that even I can't come to reconcile.
Minister.
I think my honourable friend will recognise that, of course, there are proper checks in place when people arrive at our airports, as happened last night, people who are arriving in our country perfectly legally, going about their business. And the work that we are taking forward will only help to enhance the security of our border through initiatives such as the electronic travel authorisation scheme, which I think his constituents would welcome, and which is akin to that which you see in the United States presently and in countries like Australia. But he is right to raise the issue of illegal migration as well. I can assure him and his constituents that proper security checks are carried out when people arrive clandestinely in that way. And people should not be making small boat crossings of the Channel. People should not be coming to the United Kingdom in the backs of lorries, for example. It is completely unacceptable, and it's why I think his constituents so strongly support the work that we are taking forward as a government, particularly to focus in on making Channel crossings unviable at the hands of what are evil criminal gangs who take people's money, put them in small boats, have no regard as to whether they get safely to the other side. It is heinous, and that's why we are determined to put them out of business.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do apologise. I think travellers last night were given an authentic introduction to life in Brexit Britain under this UK government, where absolutely nothing works whatsoever. But that's the chilly side of the point over. But clearly, passengers in Glasgow were impacted by this issue. However, the fix coming at 12:30 was just before a whole slew of 12 flights arrived. So Glasgow, in many ways, was a lucky airport, and the passengers arriving at Glasgow Airport were lucky. But he speaks about contingency plans and working. Can I ask him, what is he doing in terms of reaching out to individual airports and looking at the contingency plans and how they worked in individual airports last night, and moving forward, what resources are available to those airports in order to improve those contingency plans?
Minister.
I think in terms of the first part of his question, I mean, what a load of rubbish, Madam Deputy Speaker. When it comes to e-gates, they were an important part of our border infrastructure when we were members of the European Union, and they continue to be an important part of our border infrastructure as non-members of the European Union. So I think we can discount that aspect of his question. But the second half of his question was very valid, and that's precisely why I want operational teams to spend some time engaging with the airports and with the airlines following the incident last night to make sure that we capture any and all learning that flows from that. As I've said, I think it's fair to say that across those organisations, working in partnership, there was a robust response. The contingency plan did work, but there will be things that we can learn from it, and that is as relevant to Gatwick as Heathrow, as Stansted and other ports, including Belfast. We should have those conversations, and we will have those conversations.
Kevin Foster.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's probably worth reminding ourselves why the expansion of the use of e-gates has been a useful thing to do, not just from a passenger comfort and convenience point of view, including extending it so that families with children aged 10 or over can now use them, but actually there are a range of security benefits from having some of the checks machines can perform, particularly on biometrics. So I'm sure the Minister would be grateful if I didn't go into on the floor of the House of Commons. But in terms of this type of outage, inevitably, when technology is being relied on and used, there is always the potential for something to happen. It's reassuring to hear in this instance, not caused by a malign influence, and I'm sure the Minister, if it later emerged that was the case, would come back. But I can imagine the type of assurance that's being done within the Home Office before coming here today to give that assurance at the dispatch box. But I think for me it is about further exploring what are the opportunities for other agencies and authorities to support Border Force in terms of delivering the border. To be very clear, it's very clear from his statement that at all times people are still being checked, but they're just being done by an officer rather than an e-gate. So what further work do you think could be done around, for example, having rapid deployment, support agreements, potentially with trained officers from other parts of the civil service who have the training to operate the border but aren't necessarily routinely positioned to it? And also to, again, consider the fact that actually our core goal for the border, and particularly as the ETA scheme comes in, is actually to stop people who are a threat or who we don't want to allow into the country actually getting on a plane in the first place to come to the United Kingdom, and actually more increasingly declining them at the place where they check in for their flight rather than at the UK border.
My honourable friend speaks with real authority on these issues, having been the architect of so much of the change that we are introducing at the border. He's right that when it comes to the opportunities of automation, those possibilities are enormous to improve the passenger experience, but also to have a greater understanding of many of those individuals who are travelling to our country and to be able to prevent some of that travel in the first place, rather than responding to that at the border where risk is involved. He's also asked me about contingencies. I think that there is always a place for ensuring that there is wider training and opportunity within the organisation to surge capacity in when there are challenges. That is something that we have done in responding to a number of different challenges over the years. And it is fair to say that last night there were members of Border Force staff who were perhaps not on the PCP ordinarily, but who were surged in order to be able to support the team that were working on the PCP to be able to help them to get people through the border as quickly as possible. But we should always look at, particularly where there are protracted issues affecting our ports, what we can do to provide additional support from other parts of the Home Office and perhaps even elsewhere.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I too pay tribute to the staff who worked so hard to respond to the crisis and to every traveller who waited so patiently. But the episode says a lot about the priorities the government has when it comes to controlling our borders properly. Instead of chasing headlines on immoral and expensive policies to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda, can the Minister assure me that he will focus on making sure that my Bath constituents can travel freely, safely and without huge delays?
That is always the priority of the government. I've set out the focus on security, the focus on efficiency, and also making sure that passengers have the best possible experience of the UK border. I've been able to set out the fact that in so many instances, a very high percentage of occasions, the e-gates work very successfully. That 90 million figure of passengers who pass through the e-gates quickly every year. And when it comes to the issue of border security, I think I'm probably right in saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Honourable Lady voted against the sorts of measures like the Electronic Travel Authorisation Scheme that we legislated for through the Nationality and Borders Act, which is cornerstone to our efforts to help improve security at the border, to improve that automation and to be able to bring passengers through more quickly.
Patrick Grady.
You, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think you maybe saw the honourable member for Strangford had a wee wooden spoon on his way out of the chamber earlier. I don't think any of this will surprise those of us who think that the Home Office's default position is to make it as difficult as possible for people to enter the UK, and this is essentially a manifestation again of the hostile environment being writ large. But I wonder if I can press him just a little bit on the contingencies and redundancies. And when people are processed manually at the border, is it essentially the e-gate system with a human being doing the verification, or is it sufficiently separate that people can be processed manually through the border while the e-gates are down? And can I also ask him about his relationship with the airlines and the airports, so that they are, as my friend from Paisley said, aware when large numbers of flights are expected, so that the e-gates are fully operational and fully staffed? Because certainly in my experience and that of some constituents, that's not always the case.
Minister.
So I do rather wonder if the SNP reshuffle is on the mind of SNP colleagues here this afternoon in terms of what their prospects hold as part of that, because we've heard some rather bizarre angles in some of the questions. But on the more serious point that he has raised, when it comes to the way in which we dealt with this yesterday, there was that underlying system availability to be able to support manual checks to get people through the border as quickly as possible. And we also, of course, work very closely with the airlines and with the airports to ensure that at peak times we maximise the staffing on the primary control to ensure that people are able to be processed as quickly as possible. Of course, there are people who pass through having face-to-face interactions with Border Force officers. There are people who pass through the e-gates. We make sure, though, that we take proper account of the flows through our ports, and that staffing reflects the demand that there will be at any given point in the day.
Thank you. That concludes proceedings on the statement. And so we proceed to presentation of bill. Jane Hunt.
Thank you. Medicines, vitamin B12 injections bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 7th of June.
Friday the 7th of June. Thank you. And now we come to the 10-minute rule motion. Sir Bill Wigan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to remove exemptions that require from requirements to provide access or services to a person who